Hello and welcome everybody, my name is Echo1 and today I will be reviewing the GSOR 3301 AVRFS. And don't worry, I'm not gonna say the whole name out all the time. To me and in-game it's just the GSOR and that's what I will call it. The GSOR is the tier 9 British light tank and it is an interesting tank. It is a good scout, it's a bad tank when it comes to fighting. I will show you why with some stats, I will compare it to some other tanks, I will also show you some gameplay, and in the end it's going to be conclusion time. Now what turns a light tank into a good scout? That's three factors, one of them being the view range, which is 390 meters. This is pretty much the average for most tier 9 light tanks, so that's already a pretty good start. You also have 18.75% camo while moving or while stationary. Remember, light tanks don't lose camo when moving, unlike all other classes inside of the game. The tank's mobility is also really good. We have 65 km/h forward top speed and 25 km/h backward. Combine that with almost 40 horsepower per ton, your acceleration is going to be pretty good, and you will also have an easy time going up hills and not lose too much speed when doing so. However, that's not due to the fact that you have such an impressive horsepower of 265. No, that's due to the fact that you only weigh under 7 tons. This is a very important factor if you are ever considering ramming somebody. Please don't. But whenever everybody else is trying to ram you, you should just run away, since you just don't weigh enough to win this ram battle. If we are now going to take a look at the gun, we have 240 alpha damage, which is pretty much average on a lot of tier 8 and 9 tanks, light tanks at least, so that's not good nor bad. The 232mm of penetration are actually quite good, and you can boost this up to 250mm of penetration when using APCR. We have a good dispersion of 0.35, not the most accurate gun in the game, but still accurate enough to hit a lot of the targets even at long distances. The aim time of 1.82 seconds is also pretty good for a light, and only the dispersion values, which are not really that good, are going to hold your gun performance back. So far that's been pretty good news for the GSOR, and you might ask yourself, okay, what is your problem with the GSOR then? Well, the problem is the reload time of 9.3 seconds with damage of 240 and the resulting 1500 base DPM. This might not sound like it's bad, but I'm going to put this into perspective for you by comparing it to all the other light tanks at tier 6 or above. I've sorted them by DPM, so the highest DPM will be up here, and I'm going to have to scroll all the way down until I reach the GSOR here. You can see that the tanks next to it are tier 6 tanks, one tier 7 tank, the predecessor of the tier 9 tank, the tier 8 LHMTB, and the tier 7 light tank, the Satyr. One tier 6 tank with an autoloader, and one tank that is not built for shooting as well, the ELC even 90, and even that one has an autoloader. Now I know that DPM does not seem like the most important factor for a light tank. However, if you are caught in a 1 versus 1 situation with another light tank, you will pretty much lose to every light tank that you encounter apart from your predecessors, and if your opponent is having the same tank as you. To make matters even worse, in a lot of the one-on-one fights with scouts, other light tanks might go and use HE. With your armor model, you can see that you only have 35mm on the front or 40 at the turret, and you only have 25mm on the side. So it's very easy for the opponent to overmatch that or to penetrate that with their HE shells, and therefore deal horrendous amounts of damage to you. You will also lose crew members pretty easily when being engaged like that, since the tank is very compact and everything is just pushed together. At the same time, your HE only has 42 millimeters of penetration, and for most of the opponents that you will engage, this will just not be enough. So that gives you an even greater disadvantage in one-on-one light fights. And if all of that was not already bad enough, you have a huge other problem, and that is the ammo capacity of only 25 shots. This is not a spelling error, this is not an error of the website. You do get 25 shots and that's it. That will give you a potential damage of 6,000. With only 25 shots, you will have to make every shot count. For me, this means that I'm not going to be using 8P ammunition since it just has lower penetration. I will only use APCR and a couple of HE shells. Even though the penetration is very bad on them, if you are facing opponents like, for example, a Scorpion that has almost no armor, the 80 additional damage might come in handy. So that just leaves us with the question, how do we set the GSOR up? Well, usually if you have a bad DPM, you would take a gun rammer with you to increase it by 10%, and if you have bad dispersion, you would take vertical stabilizers with you to improve them by 20% as well. However, the DPM is just horrific. It's so bad that even with a gun rammer, you're still in no way capable of fighting another light tank one-on-one. So I'm going to scratch that. Since you only have 25 shots as well, there is no reason for you to risk firing on the move and therefore wasting a shell, and that means I'm going to drop the vertical stabilizer as well. The equipment I'm going to use is only focusing the view range, the spotting, and the camo value of this tank. Now we are inside of the garage and you can see how I've set my GSOR up. I ended up using 20 APCR shells and 5 HE shells. Some cases I wish I had more HE, some cases I wish I had more APCR, but most of the time I actually just wish I had more ammunition overall. I used the commander's vision system on the boosting slot. This will decrease the concealment of enemies behind foliage, and foliage is just a fancy word for bushes, trees and stuff like that. It decreases the concealment of these enemies by 20% and also decreases the concealment of moving enemies by 12.5%. I also added the coated optics to increase the view range by 10%, and I added the low noise exhaust system to increase the concealment of the vehicle by 6 additional percent. Now overall this means I have about 43% camo on this vehicle and 470 meters of view range, and these two values in combination will allow you to outspot most of the other tanks inside of the game. So for the first replay we are on Ghost Town. We are playing the assault mode and we are on the defensive side. On the opponent's team there's only one light tank, the T-49, and apart from that they really do not have too many fast tanks. The light tank on the attacking side usually goes up to the A4 area, since the hill up there has a little bush in there, and for the opponent's team that's just the better side to push with a light tank. I decide that therefore I can probably safely advance up to the hill on the K4 line, and I didn't spot anybody so far when approaching this spot. And even now we're inside of the bush, the only tank that I can spot is the AT-15. This means that I'm going to advance a little further, and indeed no other tank is up in this area. Now the first tank that appears is going to be the Rheinmetall Borsig Waffenträger, and you can see that at the moment I'm not doing anything. The reason for that is that I want the Rheinmetall to push down that area, and soon as he's down there, there's just no way he's ever gonna escape it. At the same time, you can see that my team is approaching my location. They can do so safely since they have all the information they need because I spotted so aggressive. Now, the game the way that this game is going to develop, you can see how important map control is on a map like this. If you have multiple angles where you can attack your opponents from, you are, most of the time at least, going to have great success in the battle. Now the Rheinmetall Borsig is taken out, and I want to advance a little further, and I spot the Su 130 PM. The Su 130 PM does not have the best view range, and against my camo it can just not spot me. When I watch the Su, I can see that it's turning around, and it seems like the Su is running away. That's not usually something you do when you have a lot of tanks behind you, because then you feel confident that you can keep the position or hold the position. In this case, however, with the Su turning around like that and straight up running away, I'm pretty confident that there's not too many tanks up in this area, otherwise it would have stayed. I'm going to try and peek, see if there's any tanks there, and indeed it's only the Su, and I take it out pretty quickly. Now, this situation is where you would want to be in a light if you were able to deal a lot of damage quickly. However, with the GSOR, even a situation like this, which is basically the perfect scenario for damage dealing in a light tank, doesn't feel quite that satisfying. I've put one shot inside to the T-32, and then it almost was able to escape. The reload, together with this damage that the GSOR can dish out, is just absolutely horrible. It doesn't feel like much. I was also able to hit the T-95, and the T-95 reacted and turned its armor around, and it was able to turn the whole tank around, even though it's a pretty sluggish tank, a very slow tank when it comes to the rotation, and I could only deal damage once. Now, for me, there's no way I'm going to be able to penetrate the T-95 at that distance, especially if he's facing me. And I decide to go on, and once again I have the possibility to farm opponents from behind. And again, it's a great situation to be in, but in any other light tank I could have dealt way more damage so far. The VK ignored me, the Jagdtiger ignored me, and it's just farming time. I'm sitting up here aiming at the weak back of the Jagdtiger. I can penetrate it easily. I could even do this with way less penetration, so basically on every other light tank at tier 9 I could deal the same amount of damage, but I would have way better DPM, and therefore I could farm these opponents way faster. Now the Jagdtiger is taken out as well, and that means with our team having about, I would say, 75% of the map under control, we know where the opponents are going to be. I am gonna stop here, take out the T-49. You could see that it takes quite some time to aim because of the bad dispersion values and because of the bad accuracy while moving, but as soon as I am aimed, I am pretty confident that the shot will go in, and indeed it does. Now we are going to see a problem that I've already mentioned before, the bad penetration values on HE shells. I am standing behind the artillery, and it can't get any better than this, but I'm still not able to penetrate the target reliably. Therefore I only deal 137 damage. Now only 2 tanks are remaining. I know where they are, so I am going to play this aggressively. I still want to ramp up some damage, and if that doesn't work, I still want to at least get some spotting damage. Now the T-54 approaches me very aggressively, and he does a thing that's pretty good again. He tries to ram me. I was able to track him. He just rotated around the track, and therefore only dealt a bit damage. But if you compare the damage that he dealt to me to the damage that I dealt to him, 150 to 5 damage, it's just insane how bad this tank is at ramming. Another thing that you could see was that he was easily able to penetrate me with both of both of his HE shells. However, I was lucky that he low rolled twice. He has usually 420 alpha damage on these HE shells and only dealt 350 once and 400 on the other. Now overall, that was a pretty successful game in the GSOR. However, it was not due to the fact that the GSOR is such a great tank in this scenario. Actually, quite the opposite. I feel like with every other tier 9 light tank I could have done way more. It was just lucky for me that I got in, or it was well played that I got into the right position. Lucky for me that the opponents were mainly ignoring me and that I was able to farm all that damage. You can also see that I'm already down to 3 shots, and like I already said, this is quite a limiting factor in the GSOR as well. So, no light game review is ever really complete without a game on Prokhorovka. Prokhorovka is really scout heaven, and this is the map where this tank can play out all of the strength. Once again, the most important factor for me are going to be the opponent's light tank, like I said, especially on a map like this. The opponent has one T49 and one LT432, so one tank with pretty great vision and another tank with pretty great vision and camo value as well. The main thing that most of the tanks or light tanks will try to do is either go up to these bushes that you can see up there in the E1 area, or they will try to push along these bushes, as you can see the T49 do here. And that's why I'm doing this first pretty aggressive move. I want to keep them from getting there. T49 was too slow. He only realized that he got spotted when he already was being shot at, and therefore is taken out of the game. However, he managed to still spot the HWK-12 up there, so both teams are now lacking one light tank. Since there are so many bushes along the 1 and 2 line, and as you can see, most of the time there are already quite a few tanks, the area of this map is just very important. And it's also important to keep your light tank alive. If I were to rush in now and I would die, our team would probably lose the game because the opponent's team still has the LT432. This is for me the reason enough to play this quite safely, because I still don't know where the LT is going to be. Now, I am spotting some of the opponents, I am already getting some assisting damage, so from my point of view we could actually keep playing the game like this. However, you could already see that the Bisonte got spotted, and therefore I have to assume that the opponent's light tank is actually pretty far forward already. Now I can see, or you can see that I've pinged the E1 area because intentionally I was thinking that it was there. However, now I think that's not the case. The main reason for that is that I'm pretty sure we would have spotted him when he would have approached there. The Borask went in quite aggressively as well, so you can see that the area around the Borask, he has this proxy spotting range with the 50 meters. It's not possible for the LT432 to be inside that area without getting spotted. The main reason for me not to push into the bushes right now and try to outspot the LT432 is it has pretty good camo values, and even with the commander's vision system and even with the great view range that this tank has, there is a big chance I will not be able to spot him unless I'm in proxy range. And if I'm proxy spotting him, that also means that he proxy spots me. If he has as many tanks behind him as I do, then there's just no way for me to get out of this situation alive. Our STRV, on the other hand, thinks it's a good idea to push forward. He wasn't patient enough, and I don't want to lose any more tanks in the backline. So I am going to have that move. I'm going to have to make that move at some point, and I decide to do it now. Luckily for me, with incredibly great timing, the LT432 was just deciding to switch from one bush line to the other. He crossed the open field, I was easily able to spot him there, and with a lot of tanks being behind me, the LT-432 is instantly taking out. And this is really where Scout Heaven begins. This is really where the GSOR is in its element. This is where it can shine and where it can outperform a whole lot of the other tanks inside of the game. I am going to advance through these bushes now. Still playing pretty carefully, only using the R key once, so I'm not going in that fast. This gives me a bit more time to react when I spot a tank in front of me, because I'm not going that fast. Now, I already knocked over one tree, and that's something you shouldn't do, and now I'm going to knock over another tree. If the opponent sees this, they are going to react to that. You can see that the Zoo saw the tree fall, and the Zoo decided to instantly push me. That is, in theory at least, the right move, because only if he's close enough he can spot me. However, with the great camo value on the GSOR, he just has no way of outspotting me there. The team is taking care of the Zoo, and I am going to advance once again. And for me, or what you can see a lot of people do, is just go in and try to spot all the opponents at once. For me, that's not really interesting. I feel like whenever I spot one opponent, I can stop, because that gives the team time to focus that one tank, take it out, and I know that there's one threat less. And that is what you will see me do here. I'm going forward, the torches is taken down. Soon as this tank is dead and I know that they can't spot me anymore, I'm going to advance. I'll wait for the next tank to show up, and as soon as this tank is spotted, I once again am going to stop and wait for the team to finish him off. Now, Prokhorovka is, like I said, the best map for scout play like this. On a lot of the other maps you will have huge problems finding situations like this, where you can actually use your camo and also use bushes around you to increase your camo value, and where the view range actually matters all that much, like it does in a situation like this. And that is a problem for the tank, but we will talk more about that inside the conclusion. Now, the biggest problem for me could have been the STRV. If he was sitting in some of the bushes with the camo net activated and with binoculars activated, he would also have been able to outspot me at some points, but luckily for me he was AFK. Now I'm going to cross the open field. Once again you can see the great mobility, and for the first time you could see that the gun dispersion on this tank, especially without vertical stabilizers, is just not good. So shooting while moving will most likely result in you missing that shot, or at least not hitting exactly where you were aiming. The game is pretty much over. All that's left to do is clean up the 3 remaining tanks. So now the first thing I'll do, and I'll gladly do that, is take out the artillery of the opponent's team, and only the 53 TP and the Char Futura are remaining, so I'm going to advance right in. I still have all my hit points remaining, nothing that can really happen to me, and therefore I just want to get in and get some damage. I've dealt 1100 damage in this game, 8900 spotting damage, and like I said, that's pretty much as good as it can get when it comes to spotting. The first game on Ghost Town was an ace tanker. We've had the Confederate medal. We were dealing 3500 damage, 3050 damage, got 5 kills, 1415 base XP, so a pretty good result there. And we also spotted 3800 damage. However, like I already stated, this result probably would have been better in most of the other light tanks at tier 9, because I simply would have been able to deal more damage in the time that I've had when the opponents were exposed like this. The second game on Prokhorovka was also an ace tanker. we got the Scout Medal and the Patrol Duty Medal. 1123 damage dealt, 1483 base experience. And that was simply due to the fact that we were able to spot 9871 damage. This, once again, was pretty much the perfect scenario for the GSOR, and this will be the maps where you are going to have to perform if you want to have a good win rate inside of this tank. And as a bonus, I'm also going to be showing you the post-game stats of two other games that I've played. In this game, you could see I was able to deal 3635 damage. I fired 24 shots, and due to the fact that for the most part of this game my gunner was actually dead, and that twice I had to track an opponent instead of being able to damage him, only 16 shots of the 24 that I fired actually managed to deal damage. However, if you do the math, 24 shots means that I've only had one shot left. At this point inside of the game, where it was actually quite close, where the IS-32 was a one-shot, where the Progetto and the T-30 were not that healthy anymore, I could have been able to carry the game. Like I said, the IS-32 was a one-shot. I even had the advantage that I knew where he was while he didn't know where I was. So with a bit more ammo, I'm pretty sure I could have at least killed the IS-32 and maybe carried the game. I don't understand why there is a limitation like this in the game, why the GSOR at some point is just absolutely useless and basically just sitting HP for your opponent. Now that didn't only happen once, it also happened a second time. I've dealt 4444 damage. Out of the 24 shots that I fired, 19 penetrated and dealt damage. And this is actually a pretty good ratio. That's something that most of the time you will not be able to pull off. However, once again, I was running out of ammunition. And in this case, I was lucky enough that my team was actually able to win the game anyways, but for 2 minutes in the end of the game, I was just sitting there. My team knew where the opponents were, they had already spotted them, so I couldn't do the spotting either. The only thing I could have done was to go in there and, I don't know, suicide ram them for maybe 10 damage or something, but I was just sitting there for 2 minutes and I was being useless. And these are also the kind of games that you will have to expect if you are playing the GSOR well. So, the GSOR. What's really left to say that I haven't said yet? I feel like I've touched pretty much everything that is important about this tank, but I'm still going to sum it up one more time. The general idea of the GSOR is to have a passive scout, but the problem and the reality inside of the game is that it just doesn't work out most of the time. The first problem is that most of the maps don't allow passive spotting. There are a couple of city maps, there are small maps, there are maps with opponents just clashing into each other directly in line of sight, so there's not really a whole lot of reason for passive spots anyway. The next problem is that there are light tanks inside of the games called BRs, and a lot of the time they will just bomb rush you, they will outperform you with the great gun that they have, and they will just take you out without leaving you any chance to react on them. Then sometimes you might get the right game, you might get the right map, but that doesn't always mean that you have the right team. They might focus on something else, they might just not care about what you spot, and therefore, once again, you are pretty much useless. And all of that, of course, only applies if you are able to play a scout tank effectively. This takes a lot of practice and this takes a lot of knowledge to pull off, because scout tanks are simply the hardest class to play inside of the game, if you want to have a positive influence at least. And then of course there are the games where you realize that just spotting is not gonna cut it. You will have to deal damage, and at some point you run out of ammunition. An insanely stupid factor to limit this tank with, a big middle finger to all the players who are actually playing well, and a limitation that I will probably never understand why it is inside of the game. So, to sum it all up, if you don't have experience with light tanks, if you have any other light tank line to grind, then stay away from the British light tanks. They are incredibly hard to play, they are incredibly frustrating, and most of the time they will not be worth your while. However, if like me you've unlocked all the other light tanks inside of the game, and if you're looking for a challenge, if you are resistant to stress and if you don't freak out easily, if you are kind of masochistic as well, then I feel like the GSOR might actually be the right tank for you, because sometimes, barely ever, but sometimes this tank can actually give you great success and be a whole lot of fun to play. Especially because whenever you've performed well in the GSOR, you really did have a great game, because in most of the cases all the other light tanks would have outperformed this tank and made it a lot easier for you to get results like that. So that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.